Are you ready to hack the planet, man?
As long as Angelina Jolie is there by our sides, we are ready.
We are ready.
Ready for hack
we are jacked in. We are uploaded to the Matrix, the
You
Oasis,
could say
to the
systems nominal.
to the net, as it were. That's right, folks. Today we're talking about Cyberpunk, both the concept and the trademarked property. First by Talsorian Games, and now code product CDPR code data project. I can't ever remember. Whatever.
Me neither. But we're ready to pull you out of your cyberfunk, as it were, from Rob's last review of Shadowrun 6E.
That's right.
To talk about Mike, Cody, and Lisa Ponsmith's new game, Cyberpunk RED.
And this is Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
And I'm Dungeon Master Rob. And yeah, so we spent a lot of time talking about D&D recently, and I'm excited to get both away from that company and that setting and talk about something a little bit different. So some of you may be aware that a very big game is being released probably the day
this episode comes out.
This comes out maybe the day after, called Cyberpunk 2077, published by the makers of the very popular Witcher 3 video game.
The only company in Poland.
The roughly 50% of Poland's GDP. Hard to be entirely sure, but yeah, the only company in Poland. I don't want to, let's see, probably shouldn't dwell on that too much, but it's a big deal. This is probably one of the biggest game launches in like recent memory, to be honest. And it's
for
kind
people
of rare.
who like RPGs and like open world stuff.
Who
aren't frat brothers playing Call of Duty.
It's not a battle royale or a MOBA or something like that. There's not a ton of RPG open world stuff coming out. So anyway, pretty big deal, pretty exciting stuff. And as a part of that, if you were not aware, is based, I'm going to say probably loosely, on a 40-year-old role-playing game system called Cyberpunk. Created, written, and published by one Mike Ponsmith and friends.
And friends and family. Now, and it's very different, right? We're going from a Hasbro Wizards of the Coast published book to, was basically a almost literally mom and pop shop, labor of love type of RPG publishing company. So it will be a little bit different.
It'll be a little different.
But I would push back when you say Cyberpunk 2077 is loosely based on this. It seems like it's heavily based on this, right? The video game takes place in the same city, like from what I could tell. I mean, obviously we haven't played the game. It hasn't come out yet. Like all the like NPC corporations and famous characters, Johnny Silverhand, like everything is taken from Cyberpunk. It's just farther in the future.
So I'm just saying that to cover my ass, because I have a feeling that superficially 2077 is going to be based off of Cyberpunk RED, but I also feel that it's going to be like largely a paint job, that the themes and ideas and feel of the game are going to be purely a nod to Cyberpunk in Cyberpunk RED, but we will see. And Matt makes a good point. The letter at the beginning from Mike Ponsmith talks about his relationship with CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk 2077, and the point of this was to sort of create a precursor to 2077. So,
right.
Yeah.
So a little bit of background, right? As Rob mentioned, Cyberpunk came out 40 fucking years ago at the height of the, first wave of cyberpunk literature and art, and I guess you could even say music. And it was originally set in the year 2013, moved up to the year 2020 oh, if they only knew what dystopia awaited. Actually, I think we're still doing better than Cyberpunk 2020 as far as dystopia.
Yeah, it is an improvement.
Legitimately run by megacorps, and as far as we know, the U.S. government isn't run by a gang of four, which is the CIA, the FBI, the DEA, and the NSA, though it probably is.
I mean, yeah, not officially. Yeah,
I love the gang of four idea. So I mean, we've had to move this forward. This edition, so this is like the 4th edition of the Cyberpunk rules. Cyberpunk RED is taking place in the 2040s. Their timeline has diverged from ours sometime in the 90s, I think.
Right.
It makes a little more sense for the kind of like average person coming into a video game, like it's set in 2077. Unless you get into it, you can be like, oh yeah, this could be our future in 57 years from now. I guess I was a little disappointed that this wasn't set in 2077, just because in my own mind, I'm like, that's far enough away that this version of the dystopia can be here.
I mean, this is the same thing that Shadowrun has done, is that they've just sort of, given that when they first created the game, they picked what seemed like a sufficiently far out date, and then we passed it, and Cyberpunk had not come to pass. And so they just decided sort of arbitrarily that at this date, the world of Cyberpunk and or Shadowrun diverged from our world, and this is sort of like an alternate history, which I think is a good enough way to avoid dealing with complicated timeline issues or having to constantly re-up things. But yeah, so the original edition, or the first edition of this, came out, 84, 88, sometime in the 80s. And it's been re-upped, not quite as often as bigger name games like Shadowrun or Wizards of the Coast. Again, this is a largely a mom and pop shop. But yeah, so for whatever reason, CD Projekt Red decided that this is what they wanted to base their next game on, and so now Mike Pondsmith is putting out something for us to play with. And this might, if you were going to play 2077, it might be cool to play this alongside it or ahead of it and start getting in the mood. But yeah.
And I think if you're wondering what you're going to get, this is, I think, in some ways kind of a modernization of the classic Cyberpunk rules. And as Rob said, this is the 4th edition of the game. And the last one was like 2013 or like 2003 Cyberpunk version 3 V3, and it was a very different game, and I sort of love this. In Cyberpunk version 3, we moved away from all of the classic Cyberpunk tropes and went into the future in which like there was just like transhumanism, like nanotechnology, superpowers, like people worshiping technologies, cults. Lots of people like didn't like it. Because it's not the exact same thing. I applaud Mike Pondsmith for being like, let's take my sci-fi and continue moving it into the future.
And this is what I like, and I think I want to talk about this a bit more later, but I like this about both Cyberpunk and Mike Pondsmith, is that he's not afraid to mess with the formula. He's not afraid to take risks, and he's not afraid to be like, you know what? We're starting from scratch. Everything's fucked. All your characters are dead. The world is blown up. He's not like...
Nukes, technoviruses, let's go.
Yeah. And other games do this, but they're a little bit more precious about some of their systems and their setting stuff. And Pondsmith is like, you know what? We're starting from scratch, or we're stripping it down to bare parts and building it up. So each edition is substantially different from the previous one. And it's been a while since we've had an official edition. So Cyberpunk RED, I guess if you're attached to an older edition or not, you are kind of approaching this from the same perspective, right? This is pretty much, I mean, if you like the general setting and idea and theme of Cyberpunk from previous editions, you'll like this, but that's it's really just sort of like a theme and feel and philosophy of Cyberpunk end of play. So,
yeah.
Which I like, which I think is the thing that should be the through line in different gaming editions.
I think one of the things that made the radically divergent edition much less successful is there was no art in it other than Mike Pondsmith taking pictures of his beloved action figures dressed up like cyberpunk future people, which I find endearing. I feel like most people would prefer art. And so this new edition is kind of back to the, hey, there's art. We're back to, you got your cyber limbs, you got your hackers, less teenagers with nano superpowers. And it's a little bit of a retcon kind of reset of the lore. But one that I think, I don't know, well, I guess we can get into it. I think kind of works pretty well.
Well, and let's talk about that because this is not something I'm super familiar with, but like the lore, I like the lore. I like the world that is created.
Right. It's centered on one city, Night City, which is halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles, takes elements from both. It's the center of the techno world in the future. And
I gotta say,
the only part of the U.S. that works even a little bit.
I gotta say, for a cyberpunk setting, this is a good idea. I like this. Just pick a city and really build it out. Right. Cyberpunk is a urban campaign type of area, but there are, well, before we get into the setting more broadly and like what's in this book, there are like kind of main characters, or there were some big names in the setting, which Matt and I have discussed this before, don't like. I tend to think that you should not have too many cool, powerful people.
This is what happens when you create a franchise and you're like, what do I do with it now? I guess I'm going to write some novels and short stories. And that's what happens.
Right.
That's how we get like Johnny Silverhand and Roch Bartmoss and these types of people, which are cool characters, right?
They're
it's
cool
not great
people.
for a TTRPG.
Right.
But
I think, maybe I don't know if I read this correctly, but I think one of the early stories like kills off a bunch of these characters so that
we're in the future. They're all dead.
Yeah.
Johnny Silverhand isn't killed. He's in cryo storage so he can wake up as Keanu Reeves and tell you things are fucked.
That's right.
And that we're gonna, we're gonna spend 80 hours together on the computer playing.
That's right.
2077.
But I like this. This is the thing I respect about Cyberpunk, about Mike Pondsmith, is he's not afraid to kill, injure, reset, blow up a nuke at the top of a tower, plunge the world into a desolate future. So actually, let's talk about that. So specifically,
let's talk about the world, I guess.
There's a pretty deep world, and we're not going to be able to go into all of it. And I think I gotta say I love Shadowrun's lore, but I gotta say Cyberpunk, I think it makes a little bit more sense. And to be fair, that's because they're not trying to weave
There's no elves. That's the why it makes more sense
as well. But like
no fucking elves.
But it also like follows like this the whole like it follows a progression that makes more sense to me than Shadowrun's, which I'm willing to buy any sort of like future whatever. I'm game, but it's very weird.
Neo-Soviets, sign me up, right?
Yeah.
Orbital platforms run by a union of African nations? Fuck yes.
Yeah. But yeah, it's basically, here's what happens after the collapse of the U.S., rise of cyber technology, people are developing...
The world sucks, but the U.S. sucks the most.
Yes. Developing a bunch of new tech, and people, hack into the net. And specifically in Cyberpunk RED, this is taking place in the time of the Red, which is, I think, 2045 onward.
Or thereabouts. Yeah.
Following the Fourth Corp War, wherein a pocket nuke is set off from the top of the tower of one of these corporations. And
Arasaka.
And there's a bunch of ash and dust and environmental damage, and
the skies are red, Schumer.
That's right. So this is a particularly, in an already dangerous future, a particularly dangerous time, which is why it's called Cyberpunk RED. I think this is a good this is a great place to set it. Everything's still sort of available and techie, but things are a little bit like rougher around the edges in the time of the Red, as it were.
The bigger world building is super interesting. The smaller world building, of course, in a cyberpunk story is what matters. And Night City is a quasi-lawless city-state in the con-fed countries really don't matter, right? It's as Mike Pondsmith says, right? The world is one world, right? Borders don't matter for anyone anymore. It's more important what corporate university you went to or something like that. Night City is run by a lot of different megacorps. There are some police, right? There are territories run by gangs. And of course, there are people who are living quite well, right? A very small, the DM section, which we'll get into later, is like, show your players every once in a while some rich people eating real food.
Yeah.
Going out to movies more than once a year, right?
Right.
They've got bananas, real bananas.
Cyberpunk does better than this than some other things. Cyberpunk, and you can go back and listen to me talk about the whole concept of Cyberpunk in greater detail. And I'm going to try to refrain myself because it makes me sad. But Cyberpunk has been reduced in a lot of ways to just an aesthetic. It just here's some cool synthwave music and neon lights and a guy with a robot arm, and also here's a Japanese robot with a katana. It's but and so like you look at a lot of even current day Cyberpunk properties and you're like, why is one of the biggest corporations in the world some Japanese megacorp? And it's like, oh right, because this was designed in the 80s and it hasn't updated its ideas in 40 years. Cyberpunk's a little bit better about this. One of the sort
absolutely of, there's a Russian petro megacorp. There's all kinds of
the sort of like binding city polity is the European states sort of. I do still wish that any single Cyberpunk property would just rewrite itself so that China is more of a major player, but whatever. So again, this is Pondsmith is willing to update his ideas to reflect or his setting to reflect changing circumstances, so that Cyberpunk remains a little fresher than especially like Shadowrun, but a lot of properties.
And we'll make a lot of comparisons to Shadowrun, but I think one thing that he does do really well in this world building section of the book is that for your player characters, right, the things that make Cyberpunk make it a dystopia that lets you tell interesting stories, right, is that fighting against the system is something your characters will do. Will they be successful? Of course not, but they can make these personal victories, right? With their own bodies and the control of their own neighborhoods and their own kind of found families that they've put together. While I feel like something like Shadowrun, there's so much more of a, like, building a character and playing a character is much more of a power fantasy, in that I am a magic super elf with bionic eyes, and this is like, well, no, I need a new bionic leg because my old one is falling apart, and also I need it to earn a living.
Right. And there's a good section, so right after this we should talk about what's in the book, but there's a good section at the beginning before a lot of the mechanical stuff that's about putting the cyber into punk, which I really appreciated because I think it understands what Cyberpunk is about. And it talks about the lifestyle, the attitude, about cyberware. Cyberware is a lot more central to Cyberpunk than it is to Shadowrun, where it's still pretty central.
Your character is like what your cyberware is, right? That is we'll get into this, but that's the most important thing, probably.
Everybody has cyberware, or they should, if they expect to be
able to do anything.
Yeah, and
it would be fun to make a character who has no cyberware, and they're like, "Well, I can't check my email. I'm probably going to get owed, but I'm going to try my best."
Right, and there's no
and you could though. That's the fun thing.
Yeah,
you absolutely could. You wouldn't be the most effective character, but you'd be very, very interesting.
And you would probably eventually need to get cyberware because you would lose limbs, because that's a thing that can happen very easily in Cyberpunk. But there's no edge stat like in Shadowrun, so you can't be like a normal and just count on luck and grit. Anyway,
there is a luck stat.
There's a luck stat, but it doesn't work the same. Anyway, so there's a risk of going nuts and losing your humanity, and also just dying. And it talks about running out of cash. It reminds me It reminds me a bit more of The Hunt, which we reviewed a while back.
I Hunt, yes.
I Hunt, which place a lot of emphasis on, yeah, you're a cool monster hunter, but also you're fucking broke. And here's how do you buy enough food and find a place to crash. Like here's
a great bit of world building through your price tables. Like you can get a cyber arm with a grappling hook and a flamethrower, but can you afford rent? No. Rent for a year is more expensive than all of those things.
Right. Right, exactly. Which is incredibly realistic, right? Like, we all know what it's like to live in the 21st century. Like, yeah, okay, I could buy an iPhone. That's a fraction of what it costs for me to pay my fucking rent every month. It's like, cool. Love living in a cyberpunk dystopia without any of the neat aesthetics. Anyway, so what's in this book, Matt?
This book is insanely huge. It is 435 pages.
It's a monster.
Now, the pages are not like there's tons of art, right? The spacing is pretty big. There's a lot of tables. So even though it was 435 pages, like I crammed this book in like 48 hours.
This was not impossible to read through.
No.
And a big chunk of that, again, is
lore.
Good. It's lore. It's good lore, but it's not like necessary to play the game. I appreciate what he's done, which is or what they've done. Sorry, I shouldn't give.
Sorry, there's lots of authors besides.
I keep giving Mike Pondsmith sort of the auteur treatment, but this is a team effort. I like what they've done here. There's a little bit of world building, like context at the beginning, so you know what you're getting into, and then there's a much, much, much longer section at the end. So if you want to dig deep into the history and the lore, you can, but you don't have to wade through it, because regardless of how it might make sense, everybody reads these books from start to finish. They read front to back. I do. That's how people read books, including RPG books. Just acknowledging it and building your book that way is smart.
And one of the reasons why it's so long, and it makes sense, I think, to me, is that a lot of the stuff is kind of repeated several times. We get an introduction to the world, several short stories, how to build your character in 3 different ways: pre-stock templates, customizable templates, or basically build from scratch, which is, I think, super genius, right? And you can have all of these types of characters in the same party. They will be the same power level.
I wish that they had divided this a little differently, because I got mixed up. But I love the idea of 3 different character creation methods. Like, it's basically fast, or it's like beginner, intermediate, advanced. And I like that. I'm a big fan.
One of the consequences of this is the large page count, because in the introductory thing, here's a condensed list of equipment and skills and cyberware. If you want the 30-page list, go here. So a lot of things are repeated. Also, the same thing kind of happens with the lore. Here's a condensed version of the lore. Here's a longer backstory version of the lore that covers everything from the last book until now. And so you'll find sections where am I reading the exact same thing? And the answer is you are. But as a RPG book, that kind of makes sense.
That makes
sense.
But
of course, it makes it 435 pages.
Right. So if you, from a print perspective, it's kind of a pain in the ass. But if you were looking at a PDF or some version of this, it's good. It's a good way to. Matt's exactly right. This is a great way to lay out.
I feel like you have to look at a PDF to be cyberpunk. Otherwise, you're not cyberpunk.
You're not punk at all. So there's character creation. There's a bit on skills.
There's your combat chapter, Friday night firefight. There's a bunch of chapters on life in the city. There is a huge, and in my opinion, we'll get to it, I'm sure, later, excellent section on how to DM a cyberpunk game. There are 3 very short starting adventures, and then of course your general kind of character sheet and other info summary tables.
One thing that I love about this, like all books, it includes a little bit of fiction, a little bit of art. It also
in-world advertisements.
In-world advertisements. I just this is a cyberpunk future, folks. You gotta have ads. Anyway, it's a small
Hire
thing.
Danger Girl.
Yeah,
small girls, big guns. They will take care of the job.
Yeah. I love it. I think this is just like a great, it's a nice touch. It feels very cyberpunk. Anyway, so
shall we talk about the rules?
Let's talk about the system a bit. Yeah.
Okay.
So
we're given 4 guiding philosophies at the beginning of this system, which is style over substance, attitude is everything, live on the edge, break the rules.
Yeah. And I think these are like great guiding philosophies. Like I think they also do a really good job of explaining like what is different about a cyberpunk, the genre game, like compared to maybe your standard high fantasy RPG, which is something a lot of people will intuit, but I like to have it just sort of laid out. I think that that's nicely done. I also like the way, I like these 4 rules.
Yeah, if you're new to this is really nice. And we're presented with our, 12 roles? Now, these are not...
10 roles.
10 roles. These are not classes. Because as Rob stated before, it's your cyberware and your skills that define your characters. They're basically your one special ability. When you pick a role, you get like one special thing you can do. Rocker boys get charismatic impact, solos get combat awareness. It's a little edge that makes you better at one aspect of the game.
Now, some of these are a lot more defining than others. The biggest example being, of course, Netrunners,
Netrunner, absolutely,
which gives you basically like, and I'm going to talk about this more later, like a whole new set of skills and responsibilities and things to interact with. But otherwise, it's...
Yeah, if you want to be a, like, infiltrator character, like a cyberpunk ninja, you could pick... I mean, maybe the solo would be the best, but you could make one with any of the roles.
Right. And I like this. Each of these just has, like, here's your, like, basic, like, boost ability or your extra, flair. Like, you're good at one thing or another. Some of these are very general, like, execs or lawmen basically just get extra stuff, resources, buddies
which is
to call in.
super valuable. You can even multi-class into the roles as your character levels up.
Yeah.
Or not levels up, but improves.
And I love that fixers just get like connections and contacts. Like you could build any kind of character as a fixer. Nomads are drivers. Techs are exactly what they sound like. There's medics. I also love that there's a whole like social influencer class, the media, where I love the idea of like you're just you're live streaming your everything that you do. You're constantly TikToking your battles or whatever. I think it's a great fucking idea.
Cutting off this guy's head with my wrist blade. Like and subscribe. One critique is just a very minor thing, but sort of a big deal. Is it was a little frustrating to see 2 gendered names, the lawman and the rocker boy. Like, why not just call them, fucking ACABs and rockers or something? I mean, it's the iconic rocker boy is a woman or gendered female, and I think we're supposed to believe that it's just that's just the word for it. But there's no reason to call them. There's an in-world explanation, but come on. Anyway, these are cool. This is a little unintuitive if you're used to classes, and they don't tell you the what the abilities do on the class page. That's this is the thing of everything repeated, but it kind of makes sense.
You can flip to the back and find out, but if you're just like going through the book and you're like, I want to play a rocker boy, you would have to like go to the end of the book to find out like what actually that means. But I kind of like the idea of like you just pick a theme and then work from there.
It's set up in a way that if you have players at your table who are like, I do not want to spend 3 hours building a character, they can literally look at the page with the different roles, point to one, and then you can basically hand them a character just a few minutes later.
So this is super easy. This goes super fast. Next up,
now let's talk about the core mechanic of the game.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
And I looked this up, and there's a quote from Mike Pondsmith being like, I don't know if I was the first to do this, but I know I was one of the first. The game runs on the interlock system, which is a system that, for people who play 4th edition or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons is very familiar. You roll a die, a D10 in this case, add a stat and a skill to your outcome. And you're like, well, that doesn't seem very groundbreaking. Well, it was when Cyberpunk first came out.
Right.
And of course, it makes a ton of sense. I think it's fairly straightforward. You can either have checks be opposed by an enemy who does the exact same thing, or you can set a target number, a DV, set by the GM to roll against, right? So you add your body plus you add your reflexes plus your range combat and roll a D10, and that's what you get to hit. You can set a DV, or, your enemy, if they have a high enough ranks, can roll an opposed check. It's super straightforward, really intuitive.
You're rolling basically a D10 and then adding a couple of different things to it. Again, this works a lot like Shadowrun does. There are other... this, I think, is a great framework. It is very basic, but it also is intuitive, and it works just fine for Cyberpunk.
And so, I guess what we skipped is also, regardless of what type of character you can make, there are huge amounts of life path tables.
No, we didn't skip that. That's next.
Sorry, that's next. Okay, yeah.
So
to make your character.
If you want to, there's these really in-depth life path tables, which go over everything from your cultural origins to your personality, your dress, motivations, etc. I think you can just choose these, but if you want to randomize it,
choose or pick.
It's a really good system, and it's got a nice flow chart, right? You just follow. This is easy. You can put
this
together.
This is also super fun. I mean, if you're making a character and want to do it completely random, that would be also super fun. You'll make about 30 different roles.
Yeah.
But you will have a very detailed backstory for your character. And one of the things I like, other than maybe like some of your enemies and friends, which of course can come up in the game, like none of these have like a mechanical impact, right? If you roll, I grew up middle class, right? Before that disappeared. It's not going to like give you more credits or anything, right?
Yeah. Again, this substantially pads the page count, but this is really easy to follow. You follow the arrows. Again, if your players are like, I need some help putting a character together, you're like, great, just follow the arrows. What do you want to be? Answer the question, roll the die, off you go. So yeah, it's really easy to build the basic core of your character. You pick a role, you follow the life path charts, and then if you're doing, there's 3 forms or there's 3 methods of making a character, right? There's Street Rat, which is basically you're picking a template, super easy, takes no time at all. Edge Runner,
love this,
which is still pretty easy. You get like a set of stats and you can move them around. And then Complete Package, which is more like what you would do point buy or selecting skills, right, which is also
you just
not
get
that hard.
Pool of points, and it's like if you want to spend all your points in cyberware and not in skills or something else or your class abilities, you can do that. Or if you want to make a starting character who's already an influential rocker, you can do that as well.
And we haven't got into detail, but like I should say clearly now, this is a pretty simple system. Like compared, like the obvious comparison is to Shadowrun. It is much simpler. So even when we say something is complicated relatively, it's still pretty simple. And
however,
there are exceptions
this is
to
not
this.
The sprawl. Like if you want to play a cyberpunk system that is fairly straightforward, pick up the sprawl. It's a powered by the apocalypse system. This has a ton of crunch.
This is not rules light. However, it is. I would say that this is closer to like
D&D 5th
edition than it is to Shadowrun or to 3.5 or to probably even previous editions of Cyberpunk.
Now, Rob, there's a test for these types of games that I run in my own mind. Rob and I have a mutual friend who is a player in a lot of our games and a game master in some of them. And I call it, I sort of think of this player when I'm looking at systems. And the question I ask is, can the rifles, pistols, and other weapons be given attachments? And if the answer is yes, I know this player will love this system. I think we all have this type of player. And the answer for this one is yes. You can put fancy little attachments on your guns, and that makes so many different players happy.
It does. That being said, though, like, weapons are just sort of grouped into light, heavy, melee. You know, there are like crunchy statistics, but also you can be like, I have, you know, a gun and it's a pistol, and you know,
and this is like really kind of perfect because there's like basic weapons. You're like, I have a medium pistol, or you can go to the special custom weapons and be like, I have a Honda 69K repeater, right? And it has some special tweaks and special rules. I think it makes it easy for you to like make your own special weapons, right?
Mm-hmm. So the crunch is variable and not necessary. Speaking of, let's talk about stats and skills, which are really the sort of where you build and differentiate your characters and where all of the action happens. So
right, you've got a D10. Your stats are, I guess, 1 through 10, though normally around the range of like 3 or 4 to like 7 or 8 for starting characters. There are 10 stats, nice and even. Intelligence, reflex, dexterity, tech, cool, will, luck, movement, body, and empathy.
Yeah. So there's, this is, again, that's a lot of stats, but it's pretty simple. There's,
there's like 100 skills, I want to say. There's like 5,000 skills.
There's a lot of skills. So stats, even though there's a lot of them, but yeah, there's mental, combat, fortune, and physical stats, right? And again, things like, I mean, I like, well, we can get into greater detail. I like this. It's a lot of stats. I like how they're laid out. It's not too hard. Skills, there's a bajillion skills. There's just like
there's a bajillion skills. You also have 2 derived stats, your hit points, which are determined, I love this, by a combination of your willpower and body. So you can be a smart character with a lot of hit points or a tough character with a lot of hit points.
I love this. A lot of,
or both of those things with just a shit ton of hit points.
Other systems have done this. I think Savage Worlds does something similar, but I always, again, hit points are an abstraction. I think you should be able to be tough, both by being physically tough, but also by being mentally tough. And I like it. It's well done.
Or you could be mentally tough and just graft on a Sigma lace body implant for skeletal upgrades. Now, one interesting thing is, unless you improve your willpower or body, which, you know, improving your stats is fairly experience intensive, your hit points really never go up. And even if you have like a lot of the character with the most hit points doesn't have that many more hit points than the character with the least hit points. So like one thing about Cyberpunk that I think gets the flavor of this type of play, this personal street level stories, is that like, unlike D&D 5th edition, right? 18th level character like has a 200 hit points and a first level character has 10.
Right.
It's never that dramatic, right? You're going from 35 to 60, right? Everything is still very deadly to you.
And
You're
this
just
is a very
person with metal in your body. You're gonna die.
This is a very this is a pretty lethal system. It is very much possible to die. And so investing in hit points makes sense, but also it's not easy to do. And I like this setup. The other derived stat is humanity, which is, I guess, a little bit like Essence in Shadowrun. It basically just measures how human you are. I don't love the concept that like having more robot stuff makes you less human, but from like a mechanical standpoint, I get it. And we'll talk a little bit about cyberpsychosis, which is the thing that happens when you run out of humanity, which is basically you become a insane person. Don't love that either, but I'm willing to like, I would probably re-flavor this to look different, but I don't like hate the idea of like, as you have more cyberware, something about you works less well. This is not.
I mean, maybe it's all these systems being combined together. They're obviously all like bought off the shelf kind of things for most of them. They don't integrate. It's like, I don't know, you've got a computer and it's a Mac, and then you're emulating Windows, and then you've got an emulator to play your N64 games, and like eventually something's going to break down. Actually, I think there are a lot of critiques of this from people who, in the year 2020, have actual cyber limbs, right?
Right.
And are like,
right.
This doesn't make me any less human. I
mean, I wear glasses. I have, I have a metal plate in my head from when I had surgery. Like I'm not like a cyborg, but also like, I mean, I also sort of am. Like, I don't know, like we're all like variously connected. Like if I
inject a biologically grown living organism into my bloodstream every 2 weeks to help with like arthritis, it doesn't make me like biosculpted, like, maybe. I don't know.
Like, what's the difference between like
mess with my humanity,
strapping my iPhone to my wrist and like stitching it on? I mean, I just like I don't know. Anyway, let's talk. Like, I guess we should. This comes up much later, but I do kind of want to talk. Let's talk now about cyberpsychosis, which I would say.
Okay, sure.
I have two main critiques of this system, which, spoiler, I generally like, but like there are two things in this book that I basically don't like. And one of them is cyberpsychosis. And this is the idea that when your humanity gets too low, you basically go nuts. Your humanity can be reduced by installing cyberware, and I think some types of injuries or effects.
Injuries can affect you. When you install cyberware, your maximum, humanity goes down, but you also lose some temporary points, and then you can repair those through medical and psychological therapy.
And there's credit to the team. Like, there is a bit on difficult subjects when we get to the deeper. There's a sidebar on difficult subjects where it talks about lines and veils. I think this should come sooner. I think this should come sooner if cyberpsychosis is going to be like a key part. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter that this is here, because the idea that having psychosis be a like a derived game statistic or something that happens to your character rubs me the wrong way. Like, there are a lot of people out there who are neurodivergent and who have various forms of what we would describe, or what is sometimes described as mental disorders or mental any number of like neurodiverse issues, and they're like, that's not something that happens because, like, I don't know. Sorry, this is not like game podcast related, but like this is like a lot of it is like societal. A lot of it is like how you fit into like the framework of where you live, not so much as like an innate brain thing. Anyway, so I don't love this. I think there are ways to be like, if you have too much cyberware, it interacts poorly. Maybe you do become dissociated or confused, but you don't go insane or become a sociopath. Like this, This is you don't become homicidal. This is just like a lot of things about this just bother me.
I mean, it seems like another way of doing this would just be to take the humanity stat and be like, this is just the limit of how much stuff you can fit into your body, right?
Which is what it is in Shadowrun, which is just basically
are a physical space, right? There's a limit there.
And look, I'm not even opposed to the general idea that there's some sort of immutable human essence that if you replace too much of your body with a robot part, that you become
a robot or something.
But also, I would not make it be, again, core to the game. Anyway, sorry. So
no, I mean, obviously there are better people to critique this than you and I, but I think that is the general direction the critique needs to go.
Yeah, so, and you will probably read better critiques from people who have standing to criticize it. But this is not like, I'm not going to cancel Cyberpunk or Mike Pondsmith for this. I just didn't love it. So anyway,
listen, I think Mike Pondsmith will probably handle it better than CD Projekt RED.
That's my main. I'm just like, I don't want to talk about 2077 on this podcast.
Let's not.
I'm so concerned about how they're going to handle just the idea.
The things that have come out so far on the body and.
I love the don't illegally stream our Cyberpunk game. I'm like, come the fuck on, man. Like, lame. You're the man now, CD Projekt Red. Okay, skills.
There's a million skills, including lip reading, drive land vehicle, drive sea vehicle, drive air vehicle, dance, contortionist, accounting, library search. My favorite skill. Actually, I love that.
Play instrument.
Listen, so one of the problems is I think
one specifically for firing weapons that are like braced against your shoulder. Listen, you get a lot of points for skills, so like you can do anything you want. It's just
here's the problem is like one thing that modern systems have done is when you have a system that uses skills, they've been reducing the number of skills. It makes play in the actual game at your table faster and easier as you can hold 20 different skills in your mind and as a dungeon master quickly be like, well, that's a X check, right? Mm-hmm. This has too many skills. However, if you learn them, I think this is fine. You just have to put in some time to learn. Is this accounting, pickpocket, open lock, personal grooming, or interrogation?
Yeah.
But I love that there's like a personal grooming skill. Like,
I
do
like
you have to
skills.
meet with the corporate board of Petrochem in Dallas? Well, you better get your personal grooming up there.
No, I like lots of skills. I just practically, there are better ways to do this that don't require you or your players to know 100 different skills.
The other thing that I think is really sort of sucks about the way the skills are presented is that when the NPC, so all the skills are linked to a stat by default, and when the skills are presented in NPC stat blocks, they're presented really quickly by the base skill. So let's say your players are, up against a, random corporate muscle, right? And that NPC has to make a check, right? You have to know what that skill is linked to when looking at their stat block to be able to make their roll. And that's a little frustrating. Like, anyway, that's going to slow my game down the first couple times I play.
For sure.
Next
up is weapons and armor. And honestly,
I should mention that I do like this, right? This is a skill-based system where everything's a skill, right? Yep. Unlike Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, every check is a skill check. It innately recognizes that some skills come up a lot more often, like auto-fire weapons, drive air vehicle, right? These are important, and they cost twice as much. Elegant and simple solution that I absolutely love to keep the game balanced. Perfect. That way your combat-heavy character can have all those skills maxed out, while your face or techie character can have twice as many skills in the things that are more specific.
Yeah, it is well done. It's just there's too many skills. Next up, you've got weapons and armor. And like we mentioned, these can be very simple or very complicated. And I like here in the first part, in the character creation part, they're very simple. You can look at basically every ranged weapon and melee weapon that you want on one chart. The charts in this, they're very good charts. They're very well designed. They're easy to read. It tells you what skill, how much damage it does, how many bullets it holds, how much you can shoot, how many hands you need, can you conceal it, and its cost. Bam, bam, bam. That is everything you need to and you can skin your gun wherever you want, and you can get more detailed, but you can be like, you know what? I don't care. My guy has a heavy pistol. And then everything you need to know is right there. And it's same with armor. And again, it gets more complicated later, but it starts out nice and simple.
Right. And here's the, everything is here twice. You have a simple list of equipment, armor, weapons, and then you have the, 40-page list of weapons, armor, and equipment.
Right.
And it's the same, right? You can one is for people who just want to get going, and one is for people who want to know the brand of every audio recorder they have.
And if you are in the first camp, you select your package, right? And then you're like, here's the gear that you have, which I love. I think that's just a great way. Players will get overwhelmed trying to like go through all of these lists otherwise. So yeah, big fan.
And the same is true for the cyberware, right? Which is divided into a couple of categories: arm, leg, torso, like brain stuff. And it's the same. There's a basic list and a detailed list. To build your character, right, your cyberware is super important and really defines what your character can do. And I found it, as I was trying to like build a basic character, basically impossible to do unless I had the final page of the character sheet in front of me, which I love the final page of the character sheet, which basically gives you a layout of your body and you can kind of add in limbs and arms and things wherever you want.
It's a bummer that this is necessary because it's too complicated, but the character sheet is nice. You can be like, okay, I have this slot for my eyes. I have this slot for my arms. Like, this is what I have. And yes, it's too complicated, but it does work.
Now,
yeah.
And I actually don't think it's too complicated. Like, this is the level of complication I want if I'm going to play a Cyberpunk game, right?
Okay.
I want to know what each system installed in my character's body is.
Oh, well, you know what I was going to say, and now I realize that I've walked myself into a rhetorical corner. I was going to say I wish that they would have like an easy, intermediate, advanced step for this, but they do.
But they do.
They do. So if you don't want to get like super detailed, you just pick the Street Rat package, and then
it's got everything a good Street Rat should have, everything a good solo or
your cyberware is chosen for you.
Yeah.
So you know what? That's good. Never mind. I'm wrong about this. That's actually like, I'm just like, oh, well, I have to do this myself. And why is it so complicated? I'm like, well, that's why, Rob. Anyway, so I consider myself owned.
And everything, like, just to give an example of how you can, really define your character by your cyberware, right? You could build a character that just has all sorts of tech cyberware, everything from a med scanner to, video and audio recording devices, tracker launchers, grappling hooks, etc., climbing pads on your hands and feet, etc., etc. Or you could go full combat with an arm that turns into a gun, another arm that turns into a sword, something that turns into a shield. Like, this is your character in a lot of ways,
and in
a way that I feel like again, to make the Shadowrun comparison, Shadowrun is not, because like the things are very modular. Like, you can get an arm, and then the arm has a number of slots. You can get an eye, and an eye has a number of slots that can have different things, etc., etc.
And in fitting with the 4 rules, a lot of this stuff is aesthetic or not like purely mechanical. There's a whole bunch of just fashion wear. So you can have glowing tattoos or EMP threading or, a subdermal watch. And then there's
the Mr. Stud sexual implant.
Exactly. I mean, this is good stuff. This is great. Like, not everything has to like be +1 to, firing guns.
But of course, if you're a crunchy character, why do you want a smart gun with a palm imprint neurolink? Because it gives you a +1, Choomba.
Right. So you can do both, but like I like that there's a lot of options here, and not all of them have a direct or like purely mechanical purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really, really well done.
So I think next we should talk about, actually the combat system in this game is really straightforward.
Yep.
Every character has a move and an action. Cover is evocative of what you would want in a cyber fight. You're either in cover or not. Here's how much health, the wooden wall you're standing behind will absorb. Answer, not much. Weapons have a rate of fire. So if you have auto and there are auto fire rules, I think digested the rules for combat really, really easily. They're not super
easy,
complicated.
Yeah. You roll against a DV, damage is right there. Armor is right there. Defense is right there. It's very easy.
Example of common modifiers a dungeon master can add.
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of rules for things like stealth or getting a surprise on someone. I think, though, I don't know. I kind of like it that way. I would always just give my players, you got a +5 to this shot because they don't know you're there.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I could maybe use like some sort of advantage mechanic or something along that line, but not. Again, we've seen how that can go wrong, so maybe it's better that that there isn't one.
Your turns are really fast and quick, right? And the combat round is 3 seconds long, which gets to the speed of Cyberpunk. Now, should we talk about, I think the thing everyone's probably curious is, are the hacking and computer rules good?
So we gotta talk about net running. So conceptually, let me tell you something that I like about net running. So this is a problem in Shadowrun and any hacker game. They're like, how do we deal with sort of the way that the internet is, which is that it's everywhere and you can just like pull up your phone and look at anything you want. So in the world of Cyberpunk RED, the net itself is wild and dangerous, and you don't want to just be like running around in the net. So you have to.
There are transcendent AIs that cannot even comprehend your existence. They're so advanced,
yes,
and they might just squash you and fry your brain. So maybe don't go there.
So don't go there. So you need to hack in. You need to plug in directly to like this architecture that you're trying to hack.
Everything's in a LAN.
Yeah,
it actually works. I don't know. I love this for what it makes
idea.
the players do.
I love the idea, and it means that your net runners need to have like an AR headset, right, so they can see the virtual world, but also they may need to like pull out a gun,
or
and
they
shoot
can have that cyber
implanted.
Yep.
So I like this really. It resists your decker is unconscious in the back of the van problem, which is fine, but like I think this is more active and involved and is a good way to solve the problem of the decker not physically needing to be in danger.
We've got to get R2-D2 up to the port so that the little guy can plug in, and that's exactly what you do. And it makes your players work together more. I guess one of the downsides is, like, I always kind of imagine, if a hacker's there is like, can you hack that person's smart gun so it shuts off? And I don't think you can really do shit like this.
Yeah, I don't think you can either, though. You can, like, take control of turrets and things and
cameras and defense systems. So
you can still do cool hacker stuff. You just can't, like, brick somebody's smart gun, which is too bad because that's a lot of fun. Let me tell you my problem. So I like the net rules. I think they're pretty good. However,
so there's basically like every time you go in to the net, there are floors, right? And it's like, how deep into the system are you? And it's pretty easy to design as the game master. You just put something, either an obstacle or a reward, in every floor and add some kind of check. And then, of course, netrunners also have a meat space action.
Mm-hmm. So netrunners have a cyber deck, which has a limited number of slots for both programs and hardware. This is chef's kiss. Very simple.
I love this.
You have X slots. You need, if the certain hardware or cyberware that you want, like programs, you have that many slots. It's that simple, and then you just go deeper into the architecture. The deeper you go, the more you can do. There's a bunch of programs. Here's my problem with this, Matt. The net running section is about as long as the entire character creation section, and it is clear that, this is a game inside of a game, right? And I don't want to say that you are like, if you aren't a net runner, you're like a sidekick, but you kind of are. Like, the thing is, and this is a problem in Shadowrun as well, is like the net runner is doing X number of things and like fighting hellhounds.
They're playing card games designed by Richard Garfield.
they're
Imagine a different world where Netrunner was the successful franchise and Magic the Gathering died after a few years.
Can you imagine? But like,
we'd be living in the future, man. The meme of if Netrunner took off.
Yeah, Netrunner is almost like a shiny, beautiful future. Yeah. But your Netrunner's 6 levels deep, fighting hellhounds and doing 3 things a turn, and then you're like,
black ice, man, black ice,
and you're like, I shoot the guy. I like it. I think it's good. I think this is like a well-designed like hacking subsystem. It's just like, it's clear that like there's so much invested in this that like if you aren't a netrunner, you're missing a big chunk of the game. That I think is kind of a problem.
I will say that this is still, I understood these rules. I've read 3 different editions of Shadowrun hacking rules, and I still don't really understand any of them. So the hacking and net running rules are understandable. I feel like they are evocative and flavorful. Now, because of the meat space requirement of being able to literally jack in, Rob is right. One way of looking at it is, your players are just here to get your net runner to the port.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily I don't know. It depends on the GM and the DM and the adventure, and there are moments when the most important thing is going to be combat or conversation, but there isn't like a whole framework built around social interactions or around, and combat is pretty simple, and so even driving, which kind of has like a bunch of its own rules, is still, compared to net running, pretty straightforward. So again, this is
I don't know how you're ever going to get around this in a Cyberpunk game.
Yeah.
The hacking rules are always going to be more complicated. I'm okay with that.
I'm mostly okay with it.
Specifically because I could understand these ones compared to Shadowrun, which I still don't understand.
This is a really good point. Like, in no edition of Shadowrun have I really understood the Matrix rules, and I did understand the net running rules, and it's a nice, elegant just way to think about it. I like the going up an elevator metaphor. So this is mostly just a gripe about, potentially the netrunner is always going to be the star of the show. This places some emphasis on the GM to work around that, so it's not just, everyone go get a pizza while the netrunner does their thing, which is less likely to happen than it is in Shadowrun because the rules are simpler.
Yeah.
So even if you do have special netrunner time, it's not as big of a deal. Matt is correct there.
Yeah, and I think it's set up in a way to try and prevent that as much as possible.
There's also some really good rules for building an adventure, and I like I don't know if I think these are new to Cyberpunk RED, but there's some things, demons, specific types of AIs, Black Ice gone rogue, that are their own sort of obstacles, and they take over active defenses and fuck with your team and spit out nanobots. This is a good section. This is fun. Despite my gripes, I really like the net running bit, and I like the hacking framework, and I can see putting this into an adventure really easily.
I guess my only other critiques of the system, or things that I'm curious about, maybe these are things they're saving for a supplement, and they existed as a supplement for earlier editions, is it seems like the only sort of archetypes of a cyberpunk future that you can't be is like the hacker that doesn't leave their house, which, there's a reason for that, and we like that. But you can't be like the hacker who, shuts down someone's cyberware right next to them. You need to shoot them with EMP bullets. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm fine with that. But you can't be like a rigger, right? You can't be a person who's surrounded by a cloud of drones and shoots drones at people. And there's no, maybe that's okay.
There's no easy rigger analog, which again is one of the hardest but also coolest parts of Shadowrun. I think you could build a tech that sort of does this, but there aren't a lot of, or like a nomad, but there aren't a lot.
There's not like equipment that you can buy that's like a gun drone or a spy drone.
Which probably wouldn't be very hard to add in a supplement, but it is something that's missing, and I want to acknowledge that because the rigger is a very cool archetype with a lot of neat rules in Shadowrun. And if you're willing to put in the effort to figure it out, you can play a really cool character, which is not possible in Netrunner, or in Cyberpunk.
Shall we talk about the advice given to game masters in this book? Because I think this is really useful stuff.
We should. And I want to acknowledge that we basically are skipping big chunks of the lore.
Oh, yeah. There's so much lore and Night City info.
Yeah, that's just because of time. I want to just, though, acknowledge that it's here, and it's very good, and it's well, like I said, there's a section at the beginning where you can get an overview, and then if you want to dig in, there's a lot at the end. So this is really well done. But yeah, let's talk about let's talk about the running Cyberpunk section, because this is
Dungeon Master of None, and now that we're on to this section, it's always personal.
Yeah, so they've got...
Which is the first piece of advice you're given,
It's always personal.
It's always personal. It's always street level.
There's...
And it's always a caper, which are rules I love. To me, that captures the essence of a cyberpunk story.
Mm-hmm. So there's GM advice, and before we jump into it, they've got a little bitty Cyberpunk bibliography and Cyberpunk filmography, which I want to acknowledge because I strongly like and agree with what they've chosen. These are great books and movies and shows to watch to get a feel for cyberpunk. Sometimes I feel like people who claim to be producing a cyberpunk game, for example, are not familiar with what it means to read and know about and be in the cyberpunk genre. So I appreciated that. Yeah. There's also they're just like I like how much effort has been put into theme and feel. And we've talked about this before, but Cyberpunk places a lot of emphasis on this is the feel of the game. This is, the mood. And there's a lot at the beginning of the GM section about that. Sorry, Matt, you were going to say.
I was just going to say the general advice is how to design a Cyberpunk RED 5-room dungeon, right? They give us an example of design and adventure as a beat chart, right? With sort of 5 elements and how to mix those up, and then examples as to what can go in each beat. Is a beat a complication, a revelation, a meeting, a firefight, a treasure, a big reveal, a plot twist? And there's a lot of detail here in how to run this sort of type of adventure. I really love this section.
It seems so obvious, and that I'm like mad I didn't think of it, but like obviously an adventure is a series of story beats, and they've just laid it out for you really simply here. There's a hook, development, a cliffhanger, another development, a cliffhanger. This is an example of one that they have right here. Development, climax, resolution, right? Basically your 3 core bits, tools are the hook, resolution and climax, and developments and cliffhangers. This is so obvious now that it's been shown to me, and I think that like when I'm describing this or when I'm putting this together myself, I'm working with this framework, but like seeing it laid out is just so... This is just like so helpful, I think, for thinking about how to structure an adventure. I love this.
I like the idea that's like, hey, a beat in your story is probably going to take about a half hour of real time. Of course, you then run into the problem of a 5-beat adventure is maybe a little bit too long for your average, or maybe it's about right. It's about right for your average 3-hour.
If it actually sticks to
yes.
the half-hour theory, which, practically may not work out. But this is such a good way to think about structuring an adventure. This is a great framework. I love it.
Now, my criticism building directly on this is a 400 billion page long book, and we're given about 6 pages for example kind of pre-made story beats, and we're given 3 of them, and they're fine. They're good. I was just thinking, man, if you have a book this long, I could have used 20 of these, right? And there's some other ones you can find from older published things, and I think they've released one really good one by Cody Pondsmith online for free on their website. However, it's just like, man, if I'm getting a 400-page book, I would love 20 stories, where I may never even have to plan anything.
I do love, again, these are probably obvious and intuitive, but I just like seeing them laid out here. The hooks are, things like it's a discovery, like they find something important, or there's a murder, or someone's been kidnapped. And then for the cliffhangers, it's like ambush, battle, chase. And these are obvious. You've probably thought of them, but like just having this all sort of laid out in clear terms is just as a way of like gathering my thoughts, I immediately was like, oh, this is great. I can start like putting something together just with these, these simple tools. We've talked, a lot of books are getting better with their DM sections, not all of them, but this is one of the better ones that I've seen. I think that this is it, from just helping somebody like go from nothing to something. This is one of the best GM sections I've seen in a long time. This is really well designed. It's easy to follow. Has a lot of great ideas. Big fan so far.
And I like how the adventures using this template are then presented, right? Again, there's not enough of them, but the idea that an adventure should be 2 pages. 1 page of like info for the players of like real world like news headlines and stuff. That's kind of fun. And then 1 page to describe the adventure. And if you can't describe an evening's adventure in 1 page, do you really want to be playing that system anyway? Maybe you do, but at least I don't all of the time, right? Mm-hmm. I love we can get this in 1 page. We're also given in this section how experience works in Cyberpunk RED, which I really like. Mm-hmm. Players are given, though it's not on their character sheet, which is a letdown, a box, so you'll have to cut this out and print it on something else. A set of 4 boxes with a couple lines each, and they circle 5 things. And this tells you what type of game the players want and what they want to do and how you can reward them extra experience. The things in the experience boxes are things players can do in the game, like make a new friend, discover a new technology, right? Outwit someone in a social situation, kill an enemy in a firefight.
Yeah, I don't, maybe it's not like the best way to go with this to put everybody in a little box, but it actually kind of works pretty well. And I like this framework. Ultimately, everyone will be some combination of these 4. And it's a neat, I like this because it's different, I guess. And I think it's a cool way to award or to measure advancement. Are you doing the thing? I
should mention
that you as a player want to do, right?
These are based on not the type of character you have, but the type of player you are. Mm-hmm. Warrior, explorer, socializer, or role player, right? And so a role player might be like exploring some new depth of their character. Socializer, making a new connection with an NPC, mm-hmm. right?
Let's see.
Are we sort of at the end of this book? Are there any odds and ends we want to bring up?
We haven't talked about gear much, and there's a section here on bad guys, which is good, encounters. There's a lot more here, and I don't want to give any of this short shrift. There's a section here at the end of this scream sheets, which are just like,
those are the pre-made adventures I was talking about earlier.
Right, the pre-made adventures. But they've got these, again, they come with great hooks, I guess. I really like how they're laid out. But yeah, I don't know that there's, we could talk about a lot more, but I really like, there's a lot of repetitive stuff in this book. So if you're just reading it from start to finish, you may be reading the same things over and over again. But it's still, I think, like super, absolutely really well put together. This is a really good book.
There was a really great, I think even in the Atlantic article about Mike Pondsmith, it was how his...
It was either the Atlantic or the Washington Post. He was...
Summary of Cyberpunk, was a great summation of the genre, mm-hmm. predicted the future in many ways, when this was published in 1988. Mm-hmm. But Rob's point about the book is right, is that the way your experience reading this book will be, you'll get a little bit of everything, and then you'll get it all again expanded if you're reading it like Rob and I start to finish. Another thing that was a little frustrating, and I do want to point out, this studio is a much smaller studio. I think Mike Pondsmith was quoted somewhere this year that producing this book on this deadline before the video game came out almost killed me, is I think a direct quote. And I can believe it. But there are some things in here that are like, You can tell maybe the history of the world was lifted from some earlier draft, and then the description of how things are right now is like whoever wrote those two things wasn't communicating with each other, because there are things that are like, this is saying the exact same thing. You could have combined these and saved some pages and gave us more pre-made adventures.
With that in mind, again, the main comparison here is to Shadowrun. This is still better edited and better put together and has fewer errors than Shadowrun Sixth World. And there's not a single example of argle bargle foofara, or any other like placeholder text or, it's not perfect, but honestly, this is pretty good. I did not find a ton of glaring errors as I was reading through this, which I usually do, even in Wizards books. So, I don't know. All I'm asking for, I guess, is that it looks like you took it seriously in terms of editing, and that it looks like they took it seriously. So that's good enough for me.
They did. So final conclusions about Cyberpunk. I have a couple questions. Is do you like this overall better than Shadowrun? Are you planning on running a campaign with this? Would you recommend it to our listeners?
I would recommend this to our listeners. And there is a part of me that, my heart belongs with Shadowrun, despite all it has done to not deserve that attachment. And I do kind of wish that if they just added some magic, just add some magic just for fun. But honestly, it kind of we really do need just a straight up cyberpunk genre. It does not also need magic. There are parts that I wish were a little crunchier. I wish that combat were a little crunchier, and I wish that net running were less. But ultimately, as I was reading through this, I was like, gosh, I recently started, just some one-off Shadowrun games, and they were fun, but it was a mess. And I was like, what? Maybe I should just run Cyberpunk instead. Maybe I should just give Cyberpunk a shot, because it'll just work so much better, And I love the Shadowrun world, but I ran a whole campaign in Seattle in Emerald City, and it's basically the only setting that's really built out in Shadowrun. So might as well give Night City a shot. So my personal attachments to far inferior systems aside, this is great. And if you're interested in Cyberpunk or a future setting or something that's very stylistically different, I would definitely recommend you pick up this book. It's got everything. It's well put together. I'm a big fan. I'm definitely going to try to run a game in this, I think.
Looking back, this is the second. What is the name of the studio? Talsorian. Talsorian Games. Talsorian Games. A terrible name that I'm sure has great significance or something.
I'm sure it means something to somebody.
This is the second Talsorian game that Rob and I have looked at on the show. The first being the Witcher RPG, and
which sucked,
man. Listen, it had a lot of potential, but
it was bad. We talked about it. You can go back and listen.
We were not fans.
Yeah,
we were not fans. I think, man, I'm in love with this.
I'm a fan of this. I'm a fan of this. I'm excited to read. I did not have time to read in great detail a lot of the lore. I'm excited to poke through some of the the weapons and equipment details in more thoroughly. There's this is I feel as a mature DM, I am constantly looking for the right balance of crunch and fluff. I no longer have the appetite or interest in heavy, obnoxiously highly detailed crunch systems, but I also I want something to sink my teeth into, and so I can't get super excited about rules light systems. But Cyberpunk really, I think, for me is hitting a good balance, and so I'm really excited to maybe poke around with this some more.
I am as well. I'm excited to build some characters in this for fun. Just here's all the things. And then I think the system is wonderfully designed, because as I was getting started on this, I was like, damn, if I had 5,000 more Eurobucks. And then that's the point of the game. It's like, oh, if you do have 5,000 more Eurobucks, and you can build a thing. I guess I'll take that job from that shady guy who's going to ask me to risk my character's life.
For a Cyberpunk game, and this is really important, and this is something that I don't think Shadowrun has quite gotten right, but the economy is tweaked really well. And Matt's exactly right. Like, even if you start with, like, you can sign on with a corporation or a gang at the beginning to get a little extra cash. But even if you do, you're going to quickly be like, oh, man, if I just had like a little bit more, I could, get that upgrade. I could, get a bigger gun. I could, buy the car, whatever. And I can see that going on forever. You're constantly on the grind, trying to earn a little bit of extra, Eurobucks so that you can get the next shiny new upgrade or pay your rent. It already from the very beginning, like, has you thinking that way, which is perfect.
I'm not going to play Cyberpunk 2077. Just out of one, this company seems maybe a little, the video game company, not our Talsorian, a little awful, and especially with their handling of trans issues. So fuck them. Everyone's got to make their own decision. If you're like, I got to play this game, I'm not going to put you on blast. But also, I just don't have the time to play a 90-hour open-ended RPG. But seeing all the, images of the game and watching a couple episodes of Altered Carbon, it's like re-sparked, that love of cyberpunk I had maybe when I was in high school and I first read, Gibson's Neuromancer.
Right.
And I was like, ooh.
Yeah, it makes me think, it takes me back to like rereading Snow Crash over and over again. And that's nice. Like, I like to get excited about this. And that's my main, like, I'm also probably not going to play 2077 because I have other games to play. I have like Nier Automata, like, has not ever been opened. I bought it when it was on sale. That's just like one of 10 RPGs that I would like to play someday. Maybe.
Is that also a Cyberpunk game?
I don't even know. I think it is. I couldn't tell you. Somebody's going to yell at me for not knowing what it is. I think it has like a robot in it, or the main character's a robot. Anyway, the point is, it's Cyberpunk-ish. The point is, though, that like,
you can't make a robot character. That's a little disappointing.
Make a robot character. That's a good point.
But it's all about being a cyborg.
And like, AIs are
not a board.
AIs are outlawed, so there's no like, or they're
but they exist. So if you want to put, I think one of the interesting things about this game is in the lore. Once you start poking around, there's a lot of weird shit. And so if you want a cyberpunk game that gets weird, like players stumble upon a giant chimeric bio-sculpted creation monster that they have to fight, or an unknowable AI that somehow starts fucking with them for some reason. That is there. There's some weird shit going on, right? There's also a bunch of Mad Max stuff, which we didn't even touch upon. This is also a game for Mad Max.
This would be a great Mad Max game. Anyway, a lot to say about this. This is really cool. This is good. I'm excited that like a smaller indie company has produced something so cool, and I'm glad, even if I don't want to play 2077, I'm glad that they're partnering with CD Projekt Red, and hopefully we'll get some extra money and get to make more games. And
I hope Mike Pondsmith, like as a creator of RPGs, got like a huge chunk of change for basically.
I'm sure
his entire life's work.
I'm sure that he got fucked somehow, but I hope that he got some money at the very least. Probably more than he got from selling.
More than the author of The Witcher got.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Yeah. So that's it. Thanks everyone for listening to this.
Well, anyway, Rob, we've listened. The game comes out in a couple days. We've got to get to crunch time. Our corporate overlords have chained us to a desk. We're gonna not at all a metaphor.
Crunch, and crunch this podcast out.
I was just reading today that the company that has made the video game has started deploying like copyright laws to pull people's like innocent clips and screen caps of the game in the ultimate cyberpunk move.
Irony is just so fucking dead. I cannot. It bothers me. It bothers me so much. I wish that it didn't bother me so much. It's just like, if I were going to make like an ironic joke about like a corporation, it would be that one, but it's not. It's happening in real life. It's nothing says cyberpunk like like a DCMA notice. Like nothing says fight the man like having the
having your workers eating pre-made meals chained to their desk, working 18 hours a day for a product of which they will only see a fraction of their labor value.
Anyway,
in their remuneration.
I'm not going to shame anybody for playing this game. Don't feel bad. No ethical consumption of capitalism. I'm just like deeply disappointed with how it's coming out already.
Anyway, speaking of Cyberpunk, leave us 5 stars. Right. Otherwise, we will be destroyed.
Press 5 stars on your good bad app, and so that the algorithm knows that we are good.
On your agent,
not bad.
Yeah.
And thanks for listening. We love you.
Please put a microchip in your brain. Elon Musk has them ready.
That's right. And keep rolling them digital dice.